Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf mem zayin. We're in the middle of a slew of statements of Rava. Rava had a lot to say about treifot in a lung. Okay, why? Let's just talk about a few basic questions before we start. Number one, why was the lung? Okay, a lot of discussion about the lung. And the difference between really the lung and all the other treifot is that most of the other treifot, we really aren't concerned in most animals, and we don't have to check for all these things in other animals. All the other treifot, because only if, we had, let's say, drusa, if you were worried the animal was a drusa, or you were worried in a particular case where there's a concern that maybe the animal's a treifa, so you have to check. But otherwise, remember we learned that if the animal has a kosher shechita, you can assume it's not a treifa unless proven otherwise. However, the lung was different, because the lung, there were a lot of different, we're getting to all of them, disqualifications, and therefore they were actually, and not only were there a lot of them, but it was very common that there were treifot in the lung, and that's why the lungs always have to be checked. And this explains also the whole, what we ended with yesterday about the srichin, the one, the srichin, the hadade, which are these adhesions that are basically sticking two of the different lobes to each other. This is where we get into the whole issue of glat kosher. Okay, so if you might, recall glat kosher. What is glat kosher? So glat kosher, you can read about it. I'm going to give you a very, very brief background, but not everybody holds by glat kosher, and why is that? It's a machloket Ashkenazim and Sephardim, basically how to understand the sugya we ended with yesterday. So it talked there. Now what's interesting is, and I don't know exactly where this happened, but what we discussed yesterday was the adhesion of two of the parts together, and we said it can't be two parts that are next to each other, it has to be two parts that aren't next to each other, and that would be problematic. From there, somehow it got to the fact that any adhesion on the lung is a problem and has to be checked. The problem is that the Sephardim, who hold by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, he holds there's really no way to check these adhesions, and therefore he rules that all adhesions are problematic. The Rama, who's the Ashkenazi, the Ashkenazim hold like the Rama, basically says, no, there's a way to check certain adhesions. If they're very soft and they come off very easily, then, and I'm simplifying, but if they're soft and they come off very easily, then they're not a problem. So the Ashkenazim had this way of just, kind of checking them, and if they were like that, then he said it's not a problem. But the Sephardim are more stringent and need them to be, what's chalak? Chalak means smooth. Okay? Smooth, meaning having no adhesions on them. And that's where the whole chalak comes. Now, what's interesting also is that, there's also chalak Beit Yosef. You can look up and see, there's different variations of all this. But the Rama himself says that some people are lenient and some people are not, and the general custom in Ashkenaz, now most, the OU, for example, won't give a hechsher unless it's galad. Okay? Galad is chalak. Just for those, I'm thinking about the Hebrew term is chalak. In English, it's galad. Sorry about that. And so this is all right. The explanation for glat kosher, I love when you look up on the internet, it's hysterical. Every single article about glat kosher, and I looked up a whole bunch of different ones, every single one starts out or ends with, if you go to a donut store and they talk about glat kosher, there's no such thing. That's just not true. Okay, because glat became to mean all sorts of other things, but it's really only meat. It's only from an animal. It's not from a bird. Okay, and that's what it means. So what's interesting is, and this I think is very common, that when you're strict in one area, you're often lenient in another. So while the Sephardim and the Beit Yosef, who's the author of that's Rav Yosef Karo, who authored the Shulchan Aruch as well, and authored the Beit Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, they were supposed to kind of go together. In the end, they weren't. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But there's a leniency there about where you find the adhesions. So while any adhesions is a problem and can't be checked according to the Sephardim, it's actually limited, though, to certain areas in the lung, and not every area has their adhesions are problematic. Whereas the Rama and the Chumrah of the Ashkenazim is, even though they're lenient and some of them can be checked and become not problematic, but the whole lung has to be checked. It's anywhere and not in certain locations. So each one has kind of a stringency and a leniency. However, many Ashkenazim hold by the stringency of the Ashkenazim and the stringency of the Sephardim, and then you end up with, requiring everything to be glat kosher and, also being strict about when. Anyway, it's just an interesting situation. If you want to read about it, because it comes from our sugya, like I said, you could just look up, what is glat kosher, where does it come from, and you can read up more about it. Okay, we're going to move on. Va'amar Rava. So we had a few statements of Rava about treifot in lungs. We're going to continue. We're continuing still about lungs. We have a while to go still on the issue of the lungs. So the first thing we get to today is a cyst on the lung. Now, again, I just want to talk about maybe a little background to today's stuff. So, by the way, I should have said that. Glot is obviously Yiddish for halak. The halak is the term in Hebrew, and glot is the Yiddish term for halak. What's also interesting about this kind of a daf or these kind of issues is that they're trying to describe issues in words, right, to things that are visual, not words, right? It would have been much better if we had a picture and we had a picture book and they left us, now we do have pictures now, which is, different people try to say, okay, here's a picture, this shows us what it is. But we don't know what the rabbis were talking about, right? And they don't even, they're struggling themselves, it seems, okay? And sometimes we don't even have good explanations for why they say what they say. Here's a good one. So Rava says, right, just like yesterday, we have the two that are this adhesion that joins these two together. Either, right, we saw two opinions. Either it's because there was a hole and that's why there's an adhesion, and they adhere to each other because there was a hole in one of them, and that caused the problem. That was Rashi. Or maybe it's because if they're stuck together, when they tear apart, which eventually they might have done, it would have caused a perforation. So it's very unclear. Right? We don't have all the details. We don't have all the information. That's number one. The other thing is we're going to get into colors today, or the way the rabbis describe things was in words. And again, if we had a color wheel, it would have been much easier, right? So these are things that nowadays, if we would write a book or try to pass on information, we would pass it on in a bit of a different manner. So it's just interesting to keep in mind as we learn these sugyot. So Rava has this assumption, and that's why I wanted to say before we started this, which it's not so clear why. If there are two cysts, then it's a sign there was a hole. If there aren't two cysts, or I should even say it much simpler, because then I'm already getting into interpretation. If there are two cysts, it's a treifa. If it's one cyst, it's not a treifa. Why? We don't know. So Rashi claims, again, just like in the previous, if there are two cysts, we assume there was a hole. Okay? And that this is covering up the hole. The hole caused the formation of two cysts. Now, why it would cause the formation of two cysts and not one cyst? Right? Again, we're left with a lot of lack of clarity about why these are what was determined. And it could very well be that these were just traditions they had, and they just built on the traditions, or they knew why and they just didn't explain it, and then we're left with trying to figure out, and not just us, but the commentaries all try to kind of fill in the blanks. What information are we not getting? So I'm kind of adding all these things because I find that the daf is a little dry in and of itself, but it has all sorts of other issues that come up everywhere, really, which is lots of times we're not given all the information, or they're trying to describe things in words, which isn't so easy to do, and then a lot of it is left up to interpretation. So Amar Rava, Hani tarte bue, if you have two cysts, desmichan lahadade, late lehu b'dikuta, if they're next to each other, there's no way to check them. What he means there's no way to check them is, there's definitely a hole there, okay? There's no test you could do to check and to figure out maybe, there was no hole. Can't fix it. It's a problem. Chada umitchazi katarte. Now, I told you before about the two and the one because that kind of is what's underlying what he said. He doesn't really say that explicitly because now he says, what if you have one and it looks like two? And what you want to get at is how you're going to determine whether it's one or two. Rashi explains, let's say there's a crack in the middle of it, and you're just not sure, is it really a crack because they're two separate ones? Right? Imagine you make two challah rolls or two cookies, and cookies is a better image, right? You put cookies on the cookie tray, and it happened to me on Friday, and they merge together, right? Are those two cookies or are they one cookie, right? So obviously there were two that merged into one. But it's possible you ended up with a cookie, and somehow, there was a notch made in the middle, and it was separated into two. So here it would be very relevant. Is it two or one? Because two is a problem, one is not. So that's chade, it's one. Umitchazia, it looks like ketarte, like two. So what's the test? Okay, we keep having this, how do you test it? How do you check it? Maitin and silva, you take a thorn. Ubazin ala, and you basically puncture a hole in it. Ish shafchin on one side. Ish shafchin lahadade, if the liquid then goes from one side to the other, because cysts are usually full of liquid. So if it goes from one to the other, then you see they're completely connected underneath. And then you know it's only one cyst. Low, but if the liquid doesn't move to the other side when you punch the hole, then it's two and it becomes a treifa. Okay, I'll add that this doesn't make so much sense, or at least I'm confused by it. Maybe someone understands this better than me. If you punch a hole in it, probably it'll just come out of it and not necessarily go to the other one. So I'm not really sure how this helps, but some Rava thinks this is a good test. Va'amar Rava, another issue that Rava brings up in the lung. Chamesh une itle. We said there's 5 different lobes in the lung. Apa klape gavra. Okay, now they're trying to tell you, it's a funny way to say it. If the head was face down and facing you, we're now going to talk about right and left, okay? Which basically means if the animal, let's take the easier case. If the animal's facing you head up, okay, and you're basically like stomach is facing you, so the right of the animal will be on your left, okay? And the left of the animal will be on your right because the animal's facing you, just like a person standing facing you. But if the animal's upside down, the right of the animal is going to be your right, and the left of the animal is going to be your left. So they're telling you if the animal's upside down, and you're looking at it like that, facing the inside of the animal, so right where his face is toward you, tlata miyamina v'tarte mismola. You're going to see 3 lobes on the right and 2 on the left. Okay, which is another way of just simply saying on the animal's right and the animal's left. Okay. Chasir o yatir, right? It's just, again, it's funny how they describe things, right? It almost sounds much more complicated the way they're describing it, but they had a way of describing things, right? They're saying their right is on your right. Chasir o yatir o chalif. Now, if you have one less or one more, this is why you have to know how many are on the right, how many are on the left. If you're missing one or you have an extra one, or chalif, or it's the opposite. You have 5 altogether, okay, instead of 4 or 6, but instead of 3 on the right and 2 on the left, you have 3 on the left and 2 on the right. All of that is a treifa according to Rava, but we're going to see different opinions about this. So Rava thinks all those 3 consider it a treifa. Now everyone else is going to agree about the chalif and the chasir. If it's missing or it's flipped, that's a problem. But the extra lobe, not everyone's going to agree about it. Now we're going to have a story. Okay, what's good also about these dapim is you get into these scenarios where the following thing transpires and you get a little bit of a story. I think it's to lighten up things. If we just had statement, it would be even more difficult to be learning. So Meriemar. There was an extra lobe that came before Meriemar. What does that mean? It means a butcher walked in, a slaughterer walks into the house to Meriemar's house or Beit Midrash, and he brings him this extra lobe. He brings him the whole lung with the extra lobe in it. Havayativ Rav Acha Bava. Now Rav Acha was standing by the door. He wasn't inside the house, and he saw what was going on. Amar Le, when the guy came out, the slaughterer, he says, "My Amar Lach, what did he tell you?" Amar Le, Ach Sharani Ale. He told me it's kosher. Okay, now comes, and this is what you and I would have said after we just learned what Rava said. Rav Acha says to him, Amar Le, Hadar Ayla Kamei. I don't know if I would have said this, but he says, go back inside. Because Rava said, that's no good. How did he say it was kosher? Go check. Meriemar, are you sure? Is that really what happened? So the slaughterer listens to him. He goes back inside. Amar Le, Meriemar says back to the slaughterer, Ziel Emale Lamandi Yativ Ababa. Go tell the guy standing at the door, okay, stop bothering me. Go tell the guy standing at the door, late Hilchatakavate to Rava Biyateret. I don't hold like Rava when it comes to the extra one. Okay, I hold like him, like I said, chasir, chalif, yes, but not if there's an extra one. I think an additional one is not a disqualification. Now comes the Gemara and qualifies this statement. And on this statement, we're going to have another machloket. We're going to have a machloket within a machloket. So we have a machloket right now. Meriemar says extra is not a problem. Rava says it is. Now this is only if it's in line with the lobes, okay? Meaning there's lobe, right? And then another one. Aval bene treifa. Now the lung is split in 2. Remember the windpipe comes down the middle, and then you have these onod on the sides, okay? You can look at any pictures. If you have a Koren, you have a Schottenstein, they all have pictures in it. Now, the lobes are on the sides. But if this extra lobe is in the middle, even Meriemar would not say this is okay. Now on that, we're going to have a machloket as well. So now we have a story. There was a bene where the lobe was right in the middle there, in between the 2 sides. And it was brought in front of Rav Ashi. Savar Rav Ashi l'metrefa. Based on what we learned, Rav Ashi thought, okay, treifa. Amarle Rav Huna Mar bar Avia. Okay, it's very interesting. This is a person we don't usually hear of, Rav Huna Mar, the son of Avia. Okay. he comes and tells Rav Ashi something, right? Rav Ashi was the Gadol Ador, okay, but somehow he knows more, and maybe you'll see in a minute why he knows more, because even though he's an unknown rabbi, Kol hanecheva barayata hachid lehu. All the animals that graze in the wild, they have this extra lobe. Okay, maybe he knew more about animals than the rabbis did, right? And he says, this extra lobe is not a problem. This is very common in wild animals, and therefore this is just normal. Remember, treifa, it has to be something that's abnormal. This is normal. The karalu tabachay, and he says, and the tabachim have a name for it. They call it ininuta devarda. Okay, that's their name for it. And basically, this is an extra lobe that happens. Yeah. So within this, we have we have a machloket within a machloket. We have Rava who says extra is a problem. We have Meriemar who says extra is not a problem. But Meriemar limits it to if it's in a row with the other lobes. He says not if it's in the middle. Comes this other rabbi, or this, right, he was a rabbi, but an unknown rabbi, Rav Huna Mar, and he says this is even not a problem because other animals have this, right? The animals in the wild have this part, and therefore it's not abnormal. But even within this, we're going to have a limitation. Even though he permits it, hanimile migavai, that's only on the inner part, which is where the lungs face the heart. Turning now to amubet, aval agaba, but if it's on the backside, which is by the ribs, okay, afilu ketarfa da'asa treifa. Even if it's like the size of a myrtle branch, okay, hadassim, like we know from the lulav and etrog. So if it's the size of a hadas, that's pretty small, okay? Even anything that size is already going to make it a treifa. So even if you have a really small lobe, that's going to be a problem if it's on the back side of the lung, not on the inner side of the lung. Okay, so that's the issue with extra. So we had two sugyot so far. We talked about we went back to talk about the sircha from yesterday, the adhesions. Then we talked about the cysts, and then we talked about the extra lobes. Now we have Rafram. I'm a Rafram. Hi rea dedamya leupta treifa, or ufta treifa. If you have a lung that looks like, now we're going to talk all about the appearance of the lung, all sorts of things and how it looks, which some relate to color. Okay, we're going to see it's not really clear what Rafram means. We're going to have 5 different interpretations of what he's saying. But if it looks like an ufta, what's an ufta? A wood chip. Okay, looks like a chip of wood. It's a treifa. Okay, so now what does it mean, looks like a chip of wood? Okay, this can mean a bunch of different things. Ikadamre bechazuta. Some people say in the way it looks, meaning the color. Okay, the color of a wood chip. Okay, seemingly, I don't know why, but they claim it's pale. Okay, so the color of a wood chip is pale. Ikadamre begishta. Some people say in feel, meaning the texture. It's hard. So if the lung is hard, like a wood chip is hard, it's a problem. Some people say we're talking about if it's swollen. Now Rashi says in the end that what does it mean if it's swollen? Well, if it's swollen and it turns whitish, meaning it's lighter, and then that's kind of like the first one, which is in look. Some people say what he meant was de pechiza. Now, according to Rashi, this actually means the same as begishta, because pechiza is something hard, and therefore it's talking about hard. Other people interpret it in different ways, but according to Rashi, basically 1 and 3 are like 2 and 4, and basically, even though it's 4 different interpretations, they really mean only 2 different interpretations in the end. They just use different words to describe it. And now we have a final one, the 5th. The other interpretation is that it's smooth, that like a wood chip is one piece, and this doesn't have sections. It's not sectioned off into lobes, and that would be a case where, obviously, right, that seems like it would be a treifa because it's not in different sections. Okay, next, I'm a Rava. We're back to Rava, and Rava now is going to talk about color. Okay, kikuchla, and as I said before, this would have helped us if we had a color chart, right? But we don't have a color chart, so right, like when you pick out colors of paint, what color you want to paint your wall, you have all the shades, all the everything. And this is going to remind us a little bit of Nida, and in fact, we're going to mention a little bit about Nida, and we're going to mention another situation as well about a Brit Milah. That's going to be a different comparison, but they're always bringing comparisons from other sugyot to help understand better. And why Nida? So Nida, just to give you a little background on this, we're going to see soon, Nida blood is blood that's red, right? It has to be red. Now, the rabbis say there's 5 shades of red that are problematic. Today, we're going to talk about one of them. And they describe it in words. Red like soil, reddish soil. And red like, okay, they're going to talk about different color reds, again, to try to explain what kind of red are we talking about. So now we're going to say, Amarava, kekuchla kshera. Kekuchla is blue eyeshadow that they would use. So blue, if the lung looks blue, it's fine. Kidyuta, if it looks like ink, okay, you can see it. They're just using objects they know in life. What is this color? Ink is, what they mean by ink, very dark black ink. Okay, like as black as you can get, that's ink. Okay, right nowadays you think about how much we can do, like CMYK, and get the exact, which shade we're talking about. Okay, but they had a different way of doing it. Kidyuta treifa. So if it's black, it's a treifa. Now, why is black a treifa? So they're going to bring in laws of nida to tell you what black means. Da'amar Rabbi Chanina is black in the body. Okay? Amar Rabbi Chanina, shachor adomhu. Okay, shachor is one of the 5 colors of blood, surprisingly. If you see blood that looks like black in color, it's really red. And it's problematic for laws of nida. Okay, don't get confused here. We're going to learn here that red is actually fine, but black is bad. Why is black bad? Because what is black? And this is Rabbi Chanina's description in laws of nida. Why is black really considered like red? Because black is really red. Ela shelaka. It just went bad. It went sour. It went wrong. Something went wrong with it. There's something problematic, and it turns from red to black. So in laws of nida, it's basically like red, and it's a problem. In laws of treifa, it's red that went bad. Now, if it goes bad, that's a sign of a treifa, because something went wrong in the animal that now the blood is black. Yeruka, okay, again, this is internal bleeding because we're talking about, right, what color the lung looks like. Right? It's not that there's black outside of the lung, it's the color of the lung itself. So it's from internal bleeding, which is obviously very different than the nida, which is external. Yeruka kshera midrabi Natan, aduma kshera midrabi Natan. Okay, Yeruka, which, okay, when we learn laws of nida, they're going to talk about blood that's Yeruka. Now, Yeruka in modern Hebrew is green. In the Gemara, often it's not necessarily green. Today we're going to see what color it is. It's often yellow. Okay, so we don't know yet whether it's yellow or green, but it's kshera. And, right, so again, if the lung of the animal looks this color, greenish or maybe yellowish, it's kshera based on what Rabbi Natan says. And aduma kshera mid Rabbi Natan. And also red is kshera, according to what Rabbi Natan said. Now, we don't yet know what Rabbi Natan said. Also, something that's a little not clear here is, we started with Rava. He said black and blue, right? Blue is okay, black is not okay. The question is he still the person speaking here? Possibly. Or possibly now the Gemara is just telling us about other colors. It's not clear if this is a continuation of Rava or not. But either way, we're going to learn it. Now, what is Rabbi Natan? Here again, we're going to get a story. D'Tanya, Rabbi Natan Amar, Pam achad halachti lekarchei hayam. Okay, one time I went to these, I forget the cities by the water. This is often when people travel. They travel by water. But the point is, I was somewhere else, and some woman approaches me. Bata isha achat lefanai, shemala b'na rishon v'met. She gave a brit milah to her son. She circumcised her first son, and he died. Sheni v'met. Second one, she circumcised, and he died. Terrible story. Now, usually we say there's a chazaka that your child is going to die from circumcision, and you actually don't need to circumcise the third child because, God forbid, right, the child might die. This is what we call chazaka. Usually we hold chazaka is 3. It's actually machloket. It's chazaka 2 or 3. In the kind of scenario when there's pikuach nefesh and worry about death, so we go by 2. It's also a woman whose husbands die. Also, there's issues of chazaka there. A woman who's widowed twice. Or, is it twice? Is it 3 times? And is there some concern for the future? So, anyway, that's a completely different sugya. But now we're talking about what does she do with the third? So, shlishi haviyato lefanai. So, the third son she brings before me. Re'itiv shahaya adom. I saw he was very red. Amarti la biti hamtini lo ad sheyivla damo. I said, wait until the blood is not so full of blood. You need to wait till the bloody, this red color in the child goes away. Okay, so basically said there's too much blood here, and you can't do the Brit Milah yet, but it will fix itself. Okay, now what does it mean, right? There basically might have been some internal bleeding, but that will go away. So now you see why red in a lung is not a treifa, because based on what Rabbi Natan said, this is something that can be healed. What happened? Happy ending to the story. Himtina lo umalo tovachaya. Okay, so she waited until the baby was no longer red, and she gave him a brit milah, and he survived. Vayu kolinoto Natana Bavli Ashmo, and they called him Natana Bavli after Natan Abavli, you basically saved his life. And we're going to hear another story because we're waiting for the Yeruka. V'shuv pam alachti lemedinat Kapotkia, a different place. Bati isha lefanai, shamala b'na, rishon umet, sheni v'met. Right? She circumcised her children. First one died, second one died. Shlishi Avia told the Fanai, same story. She brought before the third child. Ritiv shaya yarok. I saw he was green. By the way, this is when we say, okay, again, it might be yellow, right? Yellow, we know from, jaundiced. Hitzatsti bo v'lo hayabo dam brit. Now, I looked carefully and I saw, and I don't know, right, if this is the same, right? I don't think this is like jaundice, but the point is, he saw that his color was off, and he realized that there wasn't enough blood circulation going on. Amartila biti amtini lo ad shipolbo damo. So he says, wait until the blood starts circulating properly, and then you can give him a brit milah. Himtina lo umalo to v'chaya vayu kolino to natana bavli al shvo. Same ending of the story, right? Happy ending. She circumcises the baby. She calls the baby by Rabbi Natan's name. Okay, so now we have, right, the green and red. Okay, again, we're going to see what this green is soon, but right, probably more yellow is okay. Okay, now, or maybe it's actually green. We're going to see. We're going to see that certain shades of yellow are problematic. So it's not really clear from here. But the Yeruka, they were right. The truth is, it's going to be clear later that they actually really mean green and not yellow. Okay, now I remember the continuation. It's hard to put them together because you're going to see it's disjointed here. So now we're going to continue. Amarav Kahana, we're moving to somebody else. Kikav dikshera, if it looks like a liver, it's fine. Kibisra, if it looks like meat, treifa, like flesh. Simanech, how do you remember this? Ubasar b'sadeh treifa, because the pasuk about treifa says ubasar b'sadeh treifa, so basar goes with treifa. That's how you remember if it looks like basar, like the meat, it's a problem. If it looks like the liver, it's kshera. Again, what does it mean looks like? This goes back to what we saw about Rafram. Is it looks like the texture is like it? Because the liver has that unique texture, as we know. Like if you ever eat liver, right, or you've seen very different texture. Or perhaps they're talking about the color. Okay, again, it could be still on the issue of color. Amarav Sama Bereda Rava, Hirea Didamya Kikashuta. And by the way, it makes sense to talk about color because we were talking about color a minute ago, and now we're talking about color again. Here we're going to get back to the yellow. Kikashuta, which is daughter, and Kimorika, which is saffron, Ukigon Beata, or an egg, and they mean the yellow part of the egg, the yolk, treifa. Okay? All of these are shades of yellow. Again, they're telling you, how do you know shades of yellow? From things we see in nature. Okay? So those things are a treifa. Ela Yeruka Dikshera Hechidamya. So what's the yarok? Now this is where we're getting to it. What's the yarok then that's kshera if all these shades of yellow are problematic? Well, kikarte, like a leek. Again, they're using vegetables to figure out what the color is, the green of leeks. I assume they mean the greener part, not the whitish part, right? But the greener part of the leek where it's a dark green. Okay. Why a kidney would look green or blue is a really good question. Blue, I guess, is more like purplish, right? Like you could see something more in the purple family. Green is a little odd why it would look green. Okay, Amar Ravina. Now we're moving on to other stuff. Just to not confuse you, okay, yesterday, and we're going to come back to this, for some reason they're going to quote the exact same sugya, we saw Rav Yosef, who talked about there was the inner membrane, the outer membrane, and basically unless you have a hole in both the inner and the outer, it's not a problem. And he had the whole test, blow into it, right, and see if the air comes out completely from both sections, and if so, it's a problem. If not, it's just the inner one, and it's not a problem, right? And that's in a case where you hear some air coming out. Now we're going to use a similar test, but for a different thing completely, because that was to check, is there a hole in the membranes, the inner and the outer, which would make it a treifa. Here we're going to have a situation, I'll read it now, and you'll see it's coming from the opposite direction. Amar Ravina, atum bire'ah. If there's something sealed up in the lung. Now remember, the lung has, right, it's sealed on the outside, but inside, if you blow into the windpipe, what happens? Basically, it's like a balloon, right? And all the 5 lobes blow up. Now, what if one of them is sealed up and the air is not getting into there? So if you blow in, it wouldn't blow up. Now, here, the hole is specifically missing, okay? As opposed to there, where we didn't want a hole. Here, we want to check, maybe there is an opening somehow. And if there's an opening somehow where we could get to an opening easily, then it's going to be kosher. If not, it's going to be a treifa because no air was able to get there. So what do we do? He gives a solution. Maitina sakina v'kar'ina la. So right where it's blocked, take a knife and tear it. I'ipe mugla, if it has like a pussy kind of substance, okay, or some sort of scab there. Vadai mahmat muglahu ukshera. Okay, it must be that that's what was covering it up, and that's why when you tried to inflate the lung, nothing happened. But ilo, if not, then there's another way to check. Mutvina ala gadfa oroka, imevatz v'sakshera ilo treifa. Now he uses the same test to see if there's some sort of hole somewhere, and maybe it's not getting in, but maybe there is a little bit of air that can get in there. Maybe it doesn't look like it can. But what do? You put, again, we saw this trick yesterday, you put on the feather or the saliva, and then you blow, again, you try to inflate the lung, and if it starts, either the saliva starts bubbling up, or the feather starts to move, then you know that there's a little bit of air now. In other words, now that you cut it, if air can get through, then you know it's fine. If not, it's a treifa. Amar Rav Yosef. So now we're going to get to Rav Yosef. He's the one who gave us this test yesterday, and we're going to get there in 1 minute, but first we're going to have something else. Krum sha'ala machmat makah bare'a eno krum. If you have a scab that basically was in the animal because of a bruise, that's not a scab that's going to say, oh, that's blocking, right? That's obviously something that's going to go away, and it's not a problem. But Amar Rav Yosef, now we get back to that same statement. It's unclear why the Gemara is repeating this. But maybe just because we just talked about this other test and we just quoted Rav Yosef. So, hi rea da avshe, if you have air coming out, this is just a review of what we saw yesterday. If you hear some air, you hear this noise coming out. Iyadin an hecha avshe, if you know where the air is coming out of. Manchin, again, this is, you want to check if there's a hole in both membranes. Menichin ala gadfa ogila oroka, right? You put a feather or straw or saliva. Imevatz v'sai, if it bubbles up or starts moving, then it's a treifa. V'ilo kshera, and if not, it's kosher. V'ilo yadin ala, and if you don't know, in other words, where the air is coming out of, you bring a bowl full of tepid water. Remember, you put the lung inside the water, you submerge it. Say not in hot water because it'll cause it to constrict, which will close up the hole. Not in cold water because it will cause it to harden and crack. You check it with tepid water. If it starts to either bubble up or flutter, it's a treifa. Vilo, and if not, it's kshera. Tita inkuv. Why? Because it must mean that the inner membrane is a problem, has a puncture, but ila'a lo inkuv, but not the outer one. V'hai, and remember, it needs to be both punctured in order for it to be a problem. V'hai da'avsha, and the fact that you hear this air sound, where's it coming out of? Well, zika de bene benehu. It's from the air in between, the airspace in between the inner membrane and the outer membrane. But it's not a problem for it to be a treifa. Okay. New halacha. Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Re'ah, this is a little bit similar because what happens if, and as we talked about, the inner membrane has to be intact and it's either the inner or the outer and it's protected. What if something happens inside the lung itself? Like, for example, Re'ah, shenishbecha kekiton. What if it liquefies? Okay, the whole substance of the lung kind of turned into a liquid that it could be poured like a pitcher. So it sounds like that would be pretty bad. But Ula says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it's kshera, that's not a problem. Alma kasavar, it must be, he holds, chisaron mi bifnim lo shmei chisaron. If you're missing something inside, that's not a problem. Eitive Rabbi Ami Ula. Rabbi Abba brings a difficulty against Ula from our Mishnah. What does it say in our Mishnah? Hare'ah shenikva, right, that's punctured, o shechasra, where it's missing a part. Now, my chasra, what does it mean it's missing? Missing where? It's either inside, which is what we're talking about, or outside. Now, if it liquefies, it's basically missing. It's like the same thing, right? We just said if it liquefies, then it's basically some sort of thing missing on the inside, and missing on the inside is not a problem. Now, when the Mishnah says it's either perforated or missing, we're now going to explain that what must be missing. My chasra, missing where? If it's missing something on the outer part, hay nikva. You don't even need missing. Once you have a perforation, even if it's not missing, it's a problem. So of course, if it's missing something, then of course it would be a problem. So you don't need the Mishnah to tell you if it's got a chisaron on the outside, which means the Mishnah must be talking about elalad mibifnim, missing a part from the inside. Shma mina, it sounds like chisaron mibifnim shnemei chisaron. Some missing a part inside would be missing and a problem and a treifa. And that goes against what Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. To which they answer, lo olam mibachutz. No, you could say it's on the outside. Utkamar tahainu nikva. And you said, well, isn't that the same as nikva? Well, lo tzricha ela Rabbi Shimon. That line of chisaron is specifically there to talk about, to explain against, not against, but to go in line with Rabbi Shimon's position. It's there for what Rabbi Shimon said. Now we're going to explain. In other words, what do we say? If nikva, perforation, is a problem on the outside, then of course chisaron on the outside, that's much worse. You're missing a part. It's not only perforated, it's gone. Right? That's obviously worse. So why do you need to tell me that? Well, if you remember or not, we're going to see right now. Remember there's the windpipe and then it branches off into smaller ones. So until, right, the nekev, the perforation that's a problem, according to Rabbi Shimon, is not just on the outside. It has to go all the way down to the simfonot, okay, to the beta simfonot, which we say is the main one. Now, according to that, we're going to say like this. Now the Mishnah is going to say, according to Rabbi Shimon, a nekev is all the way down to the simfonot. Hanimile nekev, the lepe. That's a nekev when it's just a perforation, where no part is actually missing. But if it was missing, if it was a perforation that was missing something, which is the part in the Mishnah of chisaron, afilu Rabbi Shimon modeh. Even Rabbi Shimon will admit that even if the perforation there, where it's missing a piece, the missing piece doesn't go all the way down to the simponot, then it's okay. And then it's a problem even, right? That in and of itself is a problem. So there's two tracks. There's one where we're not missing a part, and that has to go down to the simfonot, the beta simfonot, according to Rabbi Shimon. And the chisaron can be explained as, well, there it doesn't even have to go to the beta simfonot if part of it is actually missing. And then that has nothing to do with a chisaron pnimi, and then Ula's statement can stand. Because any problem inside, though, that wasn't what the Mishnah was referring to. Okay, Rabbi Hananya. Now we're going to see a situation. We're going to see, he's going to rule on a similar situation. Let's see if he agrees with Ula or doesn't agree with Ula. So Rabbi Hananya chalash. So Rabbi Hananya was sick. Again, we get a bit of a story here. He was sick. What do you expect to happen when people are sick? The rabbis come visit. But when the rabbis come visit, they don't just come visit. They start asking him halachic questions. Like, imagine Rabbi Hananya is, maybe, I don't know how sick he was, but often usually it means he was on his deathbed, and they start asking him these halachic questions. So, al-gabe Rabbi Natan v'chol gedolei hador. Okay, a bit of an exaggerated story, but Rabbi Natan comes in, and all the gedolim, and all the gedolim of the generation, all come in to visit Rabbi Hananya, and some people say it's Rabbi Hanina, I think. Anyway, aitu kamei re'ash nishpacha kekiton. They bring before him. Okay, not only do they ask him this question, they bring it before him. This lung, which had completely liquefied, the inside of it, ve'echshara, and he said it was fine. Okay, just like Ula in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rava, now comes Rava and he says, remember Rava who keeps talking about all these cases, he adds one point though, he qualifies it. He says, Vihu dekaime simponot. This is as long as those simponot, remember those are the ducts that basically lead to the different sections, as long as they're still intact. Okay, well, how do you know if there intact? So Amar le Rav Acha Berei de Rava le Rav Ashi, so the son of Rava goes to Rav Ashi and says, Minayadina, and how are we going to know if they're intact or not? So Rav Ashi gives you another test. Okay, ending the daf with another test, although we'll do one more line after this. Amalei maitinat sa'adikunya. Take an earthenware vessel. Shafchina labagave. Pour it into there. In other words, what's the benefit? Well, now you can look at it, right? You can examine it. What are you looking for? Iipe shulyaki chivari treifa. If it has white streaks in it, remember before we have red streaks. If it has, well, actually, that's like if you're worried about blood being in there, that we're going to get to actually. That's later. Just pre-recorded it. It was in my head. But if there's white streaks in it, then the white streaks are a sign of what? That the white streaks are the simfonot that turned into white streaks. And that means they're no longer intact. Okay, that's how you check it. Okay, so if they're white streaks, it's a problem. Elo, if you don't see white streaks, then you can assume they were still intact, and it's kshera. Okay. I'm not sure why you can't just look and see, do you see them or not? Like here, if you don't see white streaks, but you don't also see them, I'm not exactly sure. But maybe we're talking about because it liquefied and you don't even know what was what is in the lung itself? I'm not really sure. It's a good question. Like maybe you just have the liquefied part now and you don't have what was the lung. Okay, anyway, that's a little bit, like I said, some of these things, there's a little bit left open that's not so clear. Amar Rav Nachman, last statement for today. Re'asheni moka ukum shalakayam kshera. This is similar, but it's a little different. Rashi explains, what does it mean, nimoka? So Rashi says, just finding it to read it, nitrokna me'eleha miktsata. So some of it came out, not the whole thing, but some of it came out on its own. Ve'ena nishpechet kikiton. But it's not liquefied that you could pour it like a pitcher, but like a pitcher of water. But it is like you're missing part of it, like part of it just slipped out of it somehow and it's no longer in the lung. Okay, so now, and you know, some of it, there's just nothing, you're missing it, right? Before we weren't missing it, it just liquefied. We called that kind of missing, but this is missing like a chunk of it somehow. So he says that's also fine. And that fits with a chisaron inside is not a chisaron, basically. And Tanya Namihachi, here's a brighter to support what he said, Re'asheni moko kum shalakayam, right again, as long as the outer membrane is intact. That's what's important. We saw that from yesterday also, right? Afilu machzeket revi'it, even if it's a size of a revi, which is a big size that's missing, okay, because that's like your minimum shear for liquids, it's kshera, okay? Even if you could pour a quarter log of liquid into that empty space, it doesn't matter. It's still fine. Okay, and that fits with what Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And with that, we finished our daf. So again, we talked about cysts. We talked about glock kosher and where that came from. We talked about cysts. We talked about the 5-0 note and what if you have a different breakdown, more or less. We had a whole debate within the more, where is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Even if it isn't a problem, where wouldn't it not be a problem? We had 3 different opinions there. And then we had Rafram, who talked about if it looks like, right? We had all these different opinions between Rafram, different opinions how to understand him, Rava and Rav Kahana and Rav Sama, all about the look of the kidney. If it looks this way, if it looks either this color or this texture that is not typical, right? Is it a problem? Is it not? What each color represents, what each, whether it's like a liver or like the meat or like the wood chip, hard, or, okay, what the halach is in all those cases. Then we got to if it's sealed, or one of the lobes are sealed, how do you check that it really wasn't sealed permanently? So Ravina gives you a way to test it. From there we got to Rav Yosef, who talked about, number one, the scab is not a problem because it'll go away. And what if the air, right? What if you're worried about, and from there we got to the membranes are punctured. How do you test for that, even though that really doesn't belong here? And then we talked about what if the inner part of the lung turns to liquid completely or is missing a part of it. And we said both of those are not a problem, even though we had a difficulty from the Mishnah, but we resolved it. And with that, we finished today's daf, wishing everyone a good day and a Chodesh Tov.